We're now all set to bring to you our keynote address on community building, mindfulness, and interculture, the DEI Prism, as we look forward to our session talking a lot about embedding an inclusive, equitable culture in organization, creating a mentally healthy workspace. That is what employees today need. We'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, Chairperson and CEO, Salesforce India, also the first woman chairperson at the State Bank of India, in conversation with Ms. Madhavan and Narayanan, senior editor and writer. Of course, we all are well aware that Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, as she plays the role of chairperson and chief executive officer for Salesforce India. In this role, she oversees the growth strategy of the company and plays an integral role in defining Salesforce relationship with the ecosystem of customers, partners, community across India. Prior to Salesforce, Ms. Bhattacharya was the first woman chairperson at SBI, where she was credited with ushering in the digital transformation era at the company. Under her leadership, SBI went on to be voted as one of top 3 best places to work in the country. It is an absolute pleasure as we welcome her.
Hello, Mr. Bhattacharya. It's very nice to have you here. Well, in a manner of speaking, because we are meeting virtually. I wish this is the real meeting and I hope the pandemic ends soon and we get back to a mode in which we can actually meet real human energy, if I may say so. Which brings me, human energy means we seem to be finding new ways to infuse energy into organizations. And of course, the theme of this event, this conversation I'm having with you is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, DEI. DEI literally, actually in French, it means, I think it's like God. And so it's the new God of the corporate sector. I wanted to ask you a very fundamental question before we go further. Primarily, we always were taught the purpose of business is the pursuit of profit and the reward of shareholders and customers. So organizational objectives traditionally have been sort of subservient to, you could call it profit motive. But right now, we seem to be in a different mode altogether. So I wanted to ask you, do you see a conflict on that? Do you think there is a compromise when an organization pursues diversity or equity or inclusion? Does it mean a percentage point of the ROI?
Frankly, I think just the opposite. In fact, diversity and equality often attract the best kind of talent to your organization. It is whatever we may say of human nature, it's a fact that, when you are assessing whether you should go to this organization or that, you will take into account what is the environment at work going to be like. Unlike, in our times when we were young, the opportunities were so few that whatever got offered to us, we took it. We never thought about work-life balance. We never thought about, so many of the other things that people think about today, especially in respect of the value-driven organization. Those were really not things that we used to think through deliberately at that stage. For that matter, just before this conversation started, you were saying that you never expected to find me in Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that I'm in Salesforce, I was also very ambivalent about it at first. And then I went and visited Mark, as you had, at Salesforce Stars, and he gave me his book to read. And there were 2 stories in that book that really and truly, impressed me. One was regarding a diversity equality, so I will narrate that story. Mark felt that, there was no gender pay gap amongst men and women in Salesforce. And he challenged the HR department to do a survey. So the HR department actually came and told him that, look, we will do the survey. But if you look under the hood, if there is money required, you will have to put that money up. So are you game for that? And he was so sure, that things were absolutely, handled in a very equal footing in his company, that he said, go ahead and do it. I don't think there will be any gap. But if there is, I will make good. And at the end of the survey, he ended up ponying up something like $5 million. To date, from that day onwards, to date, Salesforce has spent $16.2 million in rectifying the pay gap, because we keep acquiring new companies, the same surveys keep happening. Even within the existing framework, some biases creep in. So we do these surveys on an annual basis to ensure that we are giving everybody the right to equality, that is the same work, same pay. Okay. So I must tell you that this is very important because what it does is it brings to you a whole hoard of talent which otherwise would not be available to you. If you have a pool of say 100 fish to fish from, and you had a pool of 50 fish to fish from, which one would you go and try to fish at? The one with the 100 or the one with the 50? Of course, the one with the 100, because then there is a far greater chance that you will come across much better talent. And that's why, diversity and equality not only gives you the right kind of exposure to the right kind of talent, it also ensures that you have a balanced workplace view. And that is important because in the world, the gender, if you're looking at gender diversity, it's 50-50. Now, if it's 50-50, how can it be that in one workplace, the women are far more and in the other, men are far more? Should it not be equivalent across? Because then each one will understand the other person's point of view. Say, for instance, when we were very young and our mothers and all, my mother, of course, still happened to work outside. But the fact is that most families would have housewives whose worth would not be measured properly because they were not bringing in money. Everything was measured by the amount of money that you were bringing into the family. But if you really look at it, once a man starts doing a woman's work as well, or what was considered a woman's work, that is housework, he realizes what is the value of that work. So to that extent, if you are looking at a DEI policy, I think, it is proven by research that companies that are more gender diverse, more diverse from the area of ethnic, economic class, in any and every way, wherever there is diversity, there you have far better ROIs than you would get in a company that is monolithic. Because when you are a monolithic company, you are getting only one point of view. The world is filled up with different kinds of people across the board. And unless and until you see their points of view also, you are actually leaving out whole masses of customers whom you are not addressing. So therefore, DEI is actually very important for companies, for their sustainability, for their better profitability, for ensuring that a toxic culture doesn't develop. All of this is important for people to stay on and for talent to get attracted to.
This is interesting because implied in what you're saying is the fact that apart from the famous IQ argument of intelligence quotient, there is the social quotient, the SQ, and the emotional quotient, or the EQ, that automatically gets built into the processes once you take diversity and equity and inclusion as a policy, because that, I like the way you brought up the customer angle, because and the stakeholder angle, in the sense that it's not just about a linear brain understanding, but it's about understanding people empathetically. That kind of grows when you have diversity. That's an interesting point. But I want to take you back and maybe provoke you a little bit about your own experience. You were in the public sector, in banking, which is known to be traditionally a golf-playing male's profession. And here you were rising up to be the chairman of the country's largest commercial bank, India's biggest commercial bank. So I'm very keen to know, share us some little details on whether you encountered something that looked like a glass ceiling, or something in a stylistic element that you thought was a bit tougher for the woman. How did you crack it?
I often joke about this, that till the time I became chairman, whenever I was in the boardroom, and you get into the boardroom at the level of a DMD, when you become a permanent invitee, that's about 2 levels below the chairman, I was always frozen. Because the temperature in the boardroom is set at a point where men in suits and ties are comfortable. It's not set at a point where people like me in saris are comfortable. So, my hands were always cold, and I was always cupping a warm cup of tea in order to thaw my hands out. So one of the first things that I did after becoming the chairman was to request my male colleagues to please leave their coats and ties in their rooms, so that the actual temperature in the boardroom would go up and we would be able to work comfortably.
So symbolic. It's so symbolic.
Very symbolic, very symbolic. And the fact is, of course, though it was a male-dominated industry, but I also found a lot of people over there, a lot of males who were more than willing to lend a helping hand. Much of the jobs that I learned were all from people who were more than glad to take that extra step in order to help me build my knowledge, build my skills, and not only do that, but they would take the trouble of also bringing to my attention, opportunities that were coming up, bringing to my attention what could be the plus factor in a particular job, so that I could also deliver a little more than I was being asked to deliver. And as you keep doing that, you build up a kind of a reputation within the organization, where you will find that the barriers to your getting in is becoming lower and lower. So people start welcoming you because you are doing that, giving that the right inputs. You are carrying your own weight. You are not asking others to do stuff for you. And in fact, you're sometimes even extending a helping hand in order to contribute to their project. So, overall, I think what really happens is that where women are concerned, one of the reasons, of course, why we still have these male-dominated places is that women have been coming into the workforce only in the last 40, 50 years, maybe, especially in the more professional jobs. And it does take time for people to really come up to that level where then they can start influencing the organization to have more inclusive policies.
Okay. I think one thing I wanted to mention here is that the kind of help you got, although it's a very nice, laudable thing, and that's probably what you would try to do in scaling it up elsewhere. Very often to the outside observer who's not sensitive enough, it would appear as if somebody went out of the way to haul you up. The truth is that it was only about leveling the playing field, which was uneven to start with, right? So in that sense, it's not so much of privilege as much as some kind of a equality-oriented action in a fundamentally unequal landscape, right?
It is not only that, what I'm trying to say is I didn't encounter any antipathy to my being there or my wanting to learn or my wanting to contribute. So I also stepped up in order to do my bit, in order to really try and excel at what I was doing. So it's actually a both-way event. It's not something that happens all on its own or comes from one angle only. If you show your interest, if you go and ask, the people will come forward. So, it is a responsibility on both sides to take that little extra step in order to get the right platform for yourself.
That's very interesting. I think DEI can also be interpreted as dedication, energy, and initiative. So that's what you're talking about, to match the diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I'm very keen to know, let's look at it right now from your current role, how do you typically enlighten or empower your workforce on the DEI goals? One of the things, although it looks nice to see multicultural background and multi-ethnic background, people also encounter cultural barriers that can actually inhibit them or, erode a bit of teamwork or cohesion. Do you see that in some way as something that needs to be cracked, and how do you go about it?
See, if you really have adopted a DEI agenda, you must be very deliberate about it. It can't be something wishy-washy. It can't be something qualitative. At the end of the day, you have to set quantitative goals and then you have to monitor them. If you want a certain amount of diversity in your workforce, you set diversity goals. So today I'm at 28%. My goal for next year will be 35%, and I'm going to do a review. There will be a cadence for the review to ensure that we actually get to the goals by the end of the year. Now, if we are not getting, for instance, say in recruitment purposes, if we are not getting enough candidates from a diversity angle, where are the places where you can get such candidates? If there are not enough candidates ready for such positions, how can you find platforms that can actually skill these people from these diverse, areas. It could be socioeconomic strata, it could be regions, it could be religion, it could be, economic status, I had already said, it could be gender, it could be anything. Okay, it could be sexual orientation, it could be anything at all. But then you have to find those people who can help you get this particular group up to a level where then they can compete with these. If they are not available, you go about taking those actions to make it available. If they are available, then you make sure that you are addressing the issue in a manner that it becomes monitorable.
Well, actionable and monitorable. That's a banker talking. You have this tendency to quantify and make things precise so that people can be held accountable and performance can be measured. That's very interesting.
I just wanted to mention, Salesforce, in fact, in the higher executive pay, has now made this a part of the parameters on which your pay will depend. So a certain portion of the pay will get released only if you meet certain sustainability and diversity goals. So they have made it flows down from the top. This is not something that comes from the bottom, it has to flow from the top.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm just tempted to ask, is it a Salesforce individual philosophy, or is it mandated by American law that you're following?
Not mandated by law. It's not mandated.
Interesting.
Diversity is mandated by law, but executive pension compensation, depending on it, is not mandated.
No, it's good because I'm mentioning that so that Indian companies watching you talk on this could actually take a cue, because it's just like our CSR allocation. Although people may be a little cynical about it, the fact is that the more you quantify things, the more you link it up to performance appraisals, the higher the chances of it getting to fruition. But let me get a little bit controversial here, because I'm also a political journalist sometimes. It's fashionable to talk about DEI in an American sense of the term or the Western sense of the term, talking about gender diversity and sexual orientation, ethnicity in a broader sense. But we are in India where we have our own diversity debate in which we are talking about tribals and Dalits and religious minorities and backward castes, which are mainstream in politics, but somehow not being considered even mainstream in corporate sector, which seems like a bit of an anomaly to me. Have you looked at the whole thing from an Indian perspective? Is there a need for an Indian interpretation of the DEI philosophy?
Actually, in the public sector, when we go for a recruitment examination, we have 3-month coaching sessions for people from the backward communities in order to ensure that they are better trained and coached for the examinations that they would like to take.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, there is definitely a amount of progress that has to be made. For that, you also need to have, the kind of proactive action plans to ensure that they come up to speed. At the end of the day, believe me, no company can survive without merit. You have to rely on merit in order to survive in this very, very competitive world. Okay. Now, if you need merit and you're not finding it within a certain group, then you really need to start working from the bottoms up, from the schooling level itself, to see how that potential can be unlocked in them. There is a potential in a lot of people. It doesn't get unlocked because they don't have the opportunities for it. But it is important for us to ensure that we give them those opportunities, and we give it in a very, again, as I said, in a very deliberate and focused way, because we are realizing that we are not getting sufficient candidates from that particular segment of the population. Okay. And it is done. It is actually done. Means you do have some amount of, what should I say, lowering of the bar for them and things like that. But I don't think that is sustainable over a period of time, because no company can afford to, lower the bar where merit is concerned. Okay. But therefore, what is required is to unlock their potential more. Therefore, what is required is to train them. Many a times you will find extremely meritorious students from these village schools, etc., but they lack hugely in soft skills and communication, hugely. And therefore, even though they are as good or better than somebody coming from an urban setting, they're not able to express themselves. In that case, they need soft skills training. They need to know how to face an interview. So these are all things, that need to be done at the student level itself in order to ensure that we are getting the right kind of talent from whichever community we are trying to address.
Interesting. Of course, I also want to come back to HR as a vertical. In your organization, you mentioned that your pay even is increasingly linked to a certain portion of DEI objective being met in a quantifiable way. But is there any other HR initiatives that you think of that has been done or can be done that to promote DEI?
We are doing a lot of these initiatives, we are doing a lot of these initiatives in order to ensure equality and parity. We have, for instance, trainings for the managers level, the people who will be promoting their juniors for understanding what could be called unconscious bias. And the unconscious bias could be against any minority segment or could be against women. Similarly, we also have mentoring as well as coaching setups that will try and understand where you can be better. Okay, we have what is called a Better Up program. That's actually a program run by an institution. It's called Better Up. And there they try and get the feedback, 360-degree feedback of you in order to determine what you see of yourself as being able to do and what your environment is telling you. And based on that, they work out certain coaching methods and certain coaching courses that will enable you to overcome the issues that you may be having, or that will enable you to strengthen yourself more, unlock your potential. Okay. So we have a number of these initiatives within the company. Again, as I said, we have very clearly set diversity goals. We also have a very clear comparison. Whenever a promotion takes place, whenever merit increases takes place, there is always a comparison to see that we are doing the right thing by everybody. So there are a lot of very clear-cut initiatives that we take because we know that if we are really going to be serious about such goals, then we really have to work towards it. It doesn't happen on its own.
Interesting. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground in this rather brief conversation, but pretty focused, I must say. But in a crisp way, let me ask you if there was something like a toolkit for DEI or a checklist, and if I were to ask you to name 5 points or 4 or 5 points which you think would be a good sort of a checklist for anyone venturing into this field from a senior management level in an organization that has historically not been conscious of this, what would they contain?
Well, giving a very, what should I say, very crisp toolkit. First and foremost, I think we need to have the empathy to understand where people are coming from and what their challenges are, and be willing to address them. The second thing that I would feel is that there have to be policies within the organization and also in the broader ecosystem that are clearly delineated in order to encourage DEI. Okay? And the third thing that I would say is, what I said earlier, monitorable goals and incentivization for reaching those goals. All of those three, if you put them together, then you will find that, this is not very difficult to achieve.
That's DEI 101. Thank you so much, Ms. Bhattacharya. It's been wonderful talking to you. And I must say that you were so focused, typically a journalist starts with a slightly cynical attitude. This is such a nice, goody topic that how do you get focused on this? And I think you helped me more than I tried to help you on this. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you, and all the best at Salesforce. And I'm sure a lot of smaller industries who could be, which are part of your historical experience in SBI as well as your current focus would benefit from the kind of thoughts you have on this. Thank you so much, so very much.
Thank you.